Welcome to a new episode of our podcast, Epi-Nutrition. Did you know that one small gland in your neck controls your metabolism, energy, and mood? Today we'll be talking about the thyroid gland, the inconspicuous but key boss of hormonal balance. Today with Blanca, we'll talk about what can affect its function from an epigenetic perspective, why it sometimes goes crazy, and how to help it function as it should again. Hi, Bani.
Hi.
Blani, for a long time, people have been asking us questions about the thyroid gland. It is a very discussed topic, so we're finally bringing it. And I have an opening question for you. The thyroid gland is shaped like a butterfly, so do you think that it is trying to mask its dramatic hormonal fluctuations with its beautiful, cute appearance?
Well, I don't know. I haven't really thought about whether the thyroid gland has a beautiful, gentle appearance. But maybe like a butterfly. Yeah, that is actually quite interesting.
Yeah, I was just preparing. I read variously on.
Well, it is true that on the front of the neck, it has a sort of narrowed shape in the middle. So maybe someone might think so.
Well, that is what it says on the wiki scripts. So let's get to it. Do you yourself have problems with your thyroid? Are you dealing with it, or?
Completely, I am the kind of case that is not worth following. I don't really practice going to the doctor. Or rather, I do some from time to time, but I've been meaning to go for a preventive checkup with my general practitioner for a long time, and I just can't seem to get there. But I don't think I have.
You don't? Well, you'd probably know. We'll talk about what the symptoms are when a person might have something with their thyroid gland. Friends, we're getting started. The intro is over. Answering my questions will be Blanca Pekov-Golubov, a lady who has been dealing with epigenetics for years, published the first book on epigenetics in the Czech language. She runs the first epigenetic counseling center and is also the editor-in-chief of Restart magazine. Blani, I always say you are the author of the first book on epigenetics in the Czech language. When will the second one be out?
I am working hard on it. It should be out in the fall.
Super.
Just this morning we were looking yesterday, we were actually talking with your dad. And he said, well, that was sometime in 21, that is not so long ago. I said, no, that was in 19.
Yeah, before COVID.
It was before COVID when the first volume came out, and he didn't believe me, so he looked it up and found out that it really came out in 2019. AND, I am always soaking up knowledge. I am an active seeker of new knowledge, so that has actually been 6 years. So that is 6 years of intensive study with the knowledge that is being added.
Of course, so it should be dusted off and updated. And so, will he be illustrating again? What was his name, Jiraj, Izikik, or?
No, I am hoping my oldest child will illustrate it for me.
Super. So, a family business?
It is just that I have to, push her into it a little.
So, Adelka?
Yeah.
Hello, Adelka. Okay, so, and let me ask Adelka, is she some kind of artist?
She draws really beautifully, yeah. Well, so I thought I'd give her the opportunity.
Blanca, why do you think the thyroid gland affects so many people, and especially women, and what should we definitely know about it?
Well, it is hard to say why, because the exact reasons why it starts after 40 and after 50, it really gets going strong. It is said that 20% of women over 50 suffer from hypothyroidism. But I personally think that the number is much higher, that it is very underdiagnosed because the tests are not done automatically as part of preventive checkups. So if the problems aren't glaringly obvious, then it might not even be tested. It won't be discovered. I think the number will be much higher. And why that is the case is a big question. It is probably generally related to hormonal imbalance. After 40, the production of sex hormones in the ovaries decreases, and sometimes quite significantly. And the control organ of the hormonal system is the pituitary gland. And now the pituitary gland starts to get a little confused because it registers that the level of, say, progesterone, estrogen is dropping in the body, initially mainly progesterone. And so it actually starts issuing instructions to increase production. It actually produces various hormones that control the activity of the individual endocrine glands, including the ovaries. These are the so-called gonadotropic hormones which affect the activity of the ovaries. So the pituitary gland registers that your hormones are dropping, and so it issues an order, increase production. But what happens? Nothing happens. The ovaries are just shutting down, and so they just don't respond to those signals. So what does the pituitary gland do? It just keeps putting pressure on it and still nothing happens, right? A and D, thanks to that, it can actually happen, or rather because of it, to be grammatically correct. Because of that, it can actually get to a point where it can, in quotation marks, go crazy, get overloaded, and so on. And things start to happen within the hormonal balance across the whole body. You know, it can be related to insulin, for example, that insulin sensitivity can simply worsen, or insulin production can just change because once that hormonal imbalance starts to appear, the hormonal system is a terribly complex. It is a terribly sensitive mechanism. And as soon as something is disrupted there, the whole system just starts to react to it. So I think it can be very much related to this as well. You know, it just typically appears in the period when the production of those sex hormones is decreasing. So I think it can be related to this as well.
What if there are listeners, male or female, who already have a problem with their thyroid? Like, for example, my sister already had it at 15. Is that also related to the hormonal development of, like, teenagers or?
Well, it can be genetically determined. It is also about the fact that the most common problem with the thyroid is the so-called Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Right, we'll get there.
It is an autoimmune inflammation of the thyroid gland. And actually, the vast majority of autoimmune or de facto all autoimmune diseases have a strong genetic background. Some more, some less, but they all have a relatively significant hereditary component. It can range from, say, 10 to 80%, depending on the type of the specific disease, you know. So there will definitely be some genetic background as well.
In her case, yes, because she actually got it from her mom. She has it too. And let me ask, do men deal with this at all? Have you ever encountered it?
Yes, men can of course deal with it, but it is not as common as in women.
I'll just interject with a personal experience here. You know, my dad messed up his thyroid by eating too much sushi. And which here, you know, wrapped in that seaweed, he probably really overdid it. And he just, I don't know if he increased its activity probably when he was doping himself with, I don't know what seaweed contains, iodine, selenium.
Well, seaweed contains mainly iodine, and that is a bit of that iodine is kind of problematic, you know. A lot of people remember that you have to supplement iodine for thyroid problems, which is true on the one hand, because the thyroid hormones, etriiodothyronine and thyroxine, actually contain iodine. So the iodine is like a necessity there for the thyroid gland to produce those enzymes, those hormones. So it needs the iodine. But the problem there is that quite often an iodine deficiency isn't the actual cause. Yeah, because there are mechanisms that basically ensure that the iodine gets into the thyroid gland. For the thyroid gland to produce those hormones, it needs a much higher concentration of iodine inside than in the blood. So the thyroid gland, using a so-called iodide pump, which is an enzymatic system, de facto actively captures the iodine from the blood. So when you have an iodine deficiency in your thyroid, it doesn't have to be caused by a lack of it in the blood at all, but that maybe this iodide pump isn't working properly for you. That is one thing. And the second thing is that if you overdo it with iodine consumption, iodine has this property that it binds to the membranes of intestinal bacteria. Some of them, A and D, the thyroid gland is very much related to the gut microbiome. And the consequence of this binding of iodine to the membranes of those intestinal bacteria is that for about 24 hours, the production of your thyroid hormones drops significantly. Yeah, so the moment you really stuff yourself with that seaweed, but of course more things have to come together. It doesn't work, it won't work just because you overeat sushi, Of course more things have to come together, but it can be related to it because you take a megadose of iodine. The intestinal bacteria react to that. Their activity is disrupted because it binds to them, binds the iodine, and the production of those hormones is significantly reduced. And now you suddenly have a hormonal imbalance, and the body starts to react to that again. Again, your pituitary gland goes crazy and things start to happen. And if you already have some problems, if something was already starting, then the whole hormonal system can be thrown off in an instant. And then it takes a long time to get it back together.
Aha, V, thank you for the explanation. Can you please briefly explain what the thyroid gland is? What its functions are in our body? Well, I guess we just said that.
We said that it actually produces these hormones, which have an important task. They allow cells to produce energy. So basically, the moment you have a deficiency of these hormones, and it doesn't even have to be a deficiency, it can also be some kind of reduced sensitivity, That is always the question with these hormones. There can be a deficiency, but there can be a reduced sensitivity of the tissues to the hormone, which can be either at some cellular level, there can be a lack of receptors for the hormone, they can be insufficiently functional, there can be a whole range of causes. So it is either a deficiency or reduced sensitivity to those hormones when the receptors don't work properly, and if that happens, then your cells don't produce enough energy. And that can manifest itself in so many ways. Well, the best known is that you gain weight because you simply don't produce energy, so your energy expenditure decreases. Of course, fatigue is associated with that. And then the other symptoms can be that kind of chilliness, because you're not even producing the heat. The body doesn't warm up. So those women who are very chilly, they often have hypothyroidism. Hair can fall out, problematic nails. And it is often related to anemia, because about 60% of people with hypothyroidism suffer from iron deficiency, which can also be relative, because it may not be insufficient intake, but because actually the thyroid gland is very much related to the microbiome. So there can be insufficient absorption because the balance of the intestinal microbiome is necessary for nutrient absorption. When you have a DeFi, when you just have that intestinal microbiome balance shifted, then the iron is not absorbed. So you can eat enough of it, but it doesn't mean anything because it is not being absorbed. And on the other hand, the excess of iron can worsen the condition of the intestinal microbiome. And now I've gotten terribly lost, and I don't know from where.
We were talking about what functions the thyroid gland has in the body, and you were just describing hypothyroidism.
Yes, so an important symptom can be anemia, yes. And one more, I think, a very underestimated symptom is depression.
Right. And what if someone sweats a lot? Could that also be a damaged, impaired function of the thyroid gland?
It could be, but there are a number of causes. Mm-hmm. It is also kidney function that is quite related to it. And
Right.
The rate of sweating is also basically largely genetically determined. Usually, when someone sweats a lot, the sweating in the family is quite typical.
I see. Okay. Would you like to add anything else to that, to the functions of the thyroid gland in our body?
That is basically the most important thing. I mainly wanted to point out that these are the kinds of symptoms that are often underestimated, and depression is definitely one of them. Because when a person has depression, they go to a psychiatrist, fortunately these days, and get some antidepressants prescribed, but very few psychiatrists. Or of course there are many psychiatrists who take a comprehensive approach. But I think that one of the things that should always be considered in a person with depression should actually come up for assessment is the function of the thyroid gland, because the cause can really be hypothyroidism.
What are the most common causes of thyroid disorders? I wrote them down here. T-hat. It is divided into non-tumorous and tumorous. I have several types of these diseases. Can I name them? And if you want, you can comment on them.
Yeah, name them.
So, I have congenital hypothyroidism here. Would you like to say something about it?
Basically, well, list them. I'll just say that the most common is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That is absolutely the most common.
That is inflammations here. And basically, for the others, just list them because
They aren't as significant because the autoimmune cause is really the most common.
right. So then there is Graves' disease, neonatal hyperthyroidism. Then there is goiter. Can you say what goiter is?
Goiter, that is that enlargement, that swollen neck.
And is that basically because the gland is like swollen?
It is de facto like a swelling of the thyroid gland, yeah.
And is it like a lifelong thing, or can you just get rid of it somehow?
It is quite difficult by then because usually once the goiter develops, the damage is usually so extensive that it is very hard to treat. It used to occur a lot in areas that were poor in iodine. It occurred quite often, like historically, for example, in some areas, typically South Bohemia, they were very affected by it. Or those areas with a radioactive background, because there you have the radioactive isotope of iodine, which disrupts the storage of the non-radioactive isotope. Yeah, so it is typically, historically, it occurred more because it was in those areas with a low occurrence of iodine. But since iodine is now added to table salt, a pure iodine deficiency is like really very rare in the population. Usually when someone has a problem, it is more connected to other things than having an iodine deficiency.
Then there is thyroiditis, hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, thyroid diseases with euthyroidism, and so on. Mixed hemochroma. And then I divided it into tumors. And there is, for example, thyroid adenoma, toxic adenoma, differentiated thyroid carcinoma, anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, medullary thyroid carcinoma. And actually the main thyroid problem that we'll be dealing with, Hashimoto's, belongs to the non-tumorous ones.
And it is actually of autoimmune origin.
Blunny, how and why can thyroid dysfunction occur?
We've basically listed those. The tissue can be damaged, that is typical for the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. The tissue damage is typical when the immune system actually reacts to two proteins found in the thyroid gland. And it sort of takes them as a foreign antigen and attacks them. So it damages the thyroid gland itself and can lead to its complete destruction. There is a lot of inflammation present, which of course worsens its function. But there can also be epigenetic causes if we of course leave out the genetic ones. There can be epigenetic causes, specifically the iodide pump. It needs a protein for its activity, which is abbreviated NIAS, sodium iodide symporter. And that is actually a protein that enables the activity of that iodide pump. The absorption of iodine from the bloodstream to increase the iodine concentration in the thyroid gland. And the production of this protein here is heavily epigenetically influenced. So if there are, say, some disrupted methylation patterns, then the production of that protein might not work well. And that is where the disrupted absorption can occur. And then, of course, it could be a lack of some vitamins, minerals. So there can be a whole range of causes.
Thank you. Exactly as you were saying, I also have written down here that the epigenetic factors are diet, stress, toxins, microplastics, sleep, microbiome, and lifestyle. Would you like to add anything to that?
Basically, here we're talking about the epigenetic core. Diseases which are also related to that autoimmunity. De facto, for all autoimmune problems, it is true that there is some significant imbalance present in the area of the gut microbiome. And this also applies to thyroid disorders, specifically to Hashimoto's thyroiditis. AND, it is closely related to immunity because the production of some immune cells, for example, is controlled in the intestines. Typically T lymphocytes and Th17 lymphocytes, which play a very important role in these autoimmune diseases because they are the ones that secrete the inflammatory cytokines. Yeah, so all of this is controlled in the intestines. You know, the intestines absorb the nutrients there. That is another thing. So as soon as there is an imbalance in the gut microbiome, all sorts of bad things happen in the body. We've talked about it many times. We had several episodes that actually map the context of some of the most significant issues in connection with the gut microbiome and specifically with the thyroid gland. It is just very common as soon as that hyperfunction is present. The autoimmune caused hyperfunction, there is practically always some more significant imbalance of the gut microbiome.
Right. So we recommend listeners to listen to our mini-series on the microbiome if you are dealing with this problem. Andy, I have prepared some practical advice for the listeners. In case, or let's put it this way, how do I know if my thyroid is not working optimally? We've already said that.
Some fatigue and so on. Of course, if you want to be sure, you go for tests where they'll draw your hormones and determine your hormone levels.
Right.
Plus, there may be some further examination of the thyroid gland.
Is there anything to watch out for in a thyroid exam, or can you just trust your doctor completely?
I think I would leave that to the doctors. Just say, I feel like I might have or could have, of course. I am saying it affects men too. Just definitely get the hormone levels checked, and the doctor might suggest some other tests. But determining those levels is, of course, the basis.
And what specific steps can a person take to epigenetically support their thyroid gland? So I think it could start with diet, for example. You could definitely avoid alcohol, gluten.
I would definitely emphasize gluten because the incidence of celiac disease in people who suffer from hypothyroidism is significantly higher than in the rest of the population. But it doesn't have to be outright celiac disease. It can just be an increased sensitivity to gluten, which doesn't have the immunological background that celiac disease itself has. But the intestines are just more sensitive to it, and often it helps to, it is probably not necessary to eliminate gluten completely if you are not celiac, but it is definitely worth limiting it significantly, especially limiting wheat. That is kind of the basics. The other grains that contain gluten, that is not as much of a problem because some of them have a very positive effect on the gut microbiome. Typically, for example, rye or oats, right? These are foods that contain gluten, but at the same time, their positive effect on the microbiome is extremely strong. So, for example, I wouldn't remove oats and gluten from my diet if a person isn't strictly celiac. But wheat is simply a problem because the overbred modern types of wheat have a huge amount of gluten, and the intestinal barrier, the intestinal wall reacts sensitively to it. Its integrity deteriorates and the intensity of inflammation in the body increases. So that gluten thing, that is probably a good thing to try. At least try it significantly, completely eliminate wheat from your diet.
And for example, with oats and rye, it is good to keep them because of the fiber content, which is beneficial for the microbiome. Is that why?
Oatmeal can also be bought in an almost gluten-free version, so you can go that route as well. But yes, oatmeal has a significant positive effect on the gut microbiome, and so does rye. And rye has a good effect on the back parts of the large intestine, because actually not every fiber has the same positive effect on the entire intestine. Yes, for example, soluble fiber, which is highly praised, its disadvantage is that because it is soluble, it is very easily usable by the gut bacteria. So it can happen that when a person focuses on the consumption of soluble fiber and omits the consumption of insoluble fiber, then the fiber may be consumed by the bacteria in the initial passages of the large intestine. and it won't get to the back. And there an imbalance can arise, which can then manifest as an increased intensity of inflammatory processes. And specifically rye, the arabinoxylans and these polysaccharides contained in rye, they travel all the way to the back passages of the intestine. So rye is what improves the balance in those back parts of the intestine where not much else gets.
Well, the intestines are quite long. What about managing stress and meditation? Can that help?
Stress plays a huge role there, that really reducing those stress stimuli really does a lot in the thyroid gland.
Microplastics.
Microplastics are a problem with probably all autoimmune diseases.
Sure.
Because the body reacts to them, the immune system reacts to them, it increases the intensity of inflammatory processes. So actually all those autoimmune diseases can react to that. And they can, in my opinion, it is just not a coincidence that the incidence of autoimmune diseases has risen so dramatically in recent years. Intestinal autoimmune diseases have increased the most. There are so many of them now, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and the intestines get the biggest hit from microplastics because that is where the biggest pieces are, which directly irritate the intestinal mucosa and they don't get into the bloodstream. And the other organs actually react to the smaller sizes of microplastics down to nanoplastics that actually get from the intestine into the blood. And then as a result, the inflammation can worsen, which promotes the development of autoimmune diseases in other organs. But the intestines are the first to be hit.
This always makes me very sad because I know that microplastics are actually everywhere, in water and everything. And for a person to avoid them, they basically must not consume things from plastic, from soft plastics, or they shouldn't wear plastic clothes. And return as much as possible to natural materials and so on. But it is pretty hard now. The plastic is just everywhere.
Well, certainly, speaking of microplastics, to make a digression, the worst thing you can do in terms of microplastics is when you put hot food in the container.
That is terrible.
Yeah, that is like the worst. There was even a Chinese study published recently that examined the link between cardiovascular diseases and how often people eat food delivered from restaurants. And it showed a very strong correlation that the more often you eat delivered food from those little boxes where they, of course, put it in hot, right?
Mm-hmm.
The incidence of these cardiovascular diseases increases significantly. Yeah, so even something like this, like when you often have food delivered from a restaurant, can play a role. So trying to completely erase plastics from your life is a very complicated thing. But I would definitely avoid things like this that are the worst, meaning heating food in some plastic containers, cutting on plastic cutting boards where the knife literally disrupts, the structure of the board, all sorts of mixing in plastic containers and so on. Of course, there are just different types of plastics. Those hard plastics are more durable and there is less release of microplastics from them. While the soft plastics, which are not as durable, release more microplastics. So, I wouldn't try to panically eliminate plastics from my life. I would rather eliminate the absolute worst sources of microplastics. And on the contrary, just try to support the body's resilience, just purposefully reduce inflammation in the body.
We have plastic cutting boards at home. So today, they're flying straight into the plastic recycling.
I struggle with plastic cutting boards because, from my point of view, they have a big advantage. They can be put in the dishwasher.
Yeah, exactly. But that is exactly another factor that actually disrupts the structure, right? Of the plastic, of course. Yeah. We have 3 wooden and 3 plastic ones at home, and I always pull out the plastic ones because I can just put them in the dishwasher. But lately I can calmly admit that I tend to cut on the wooden one for this exact reason. AND, thanks to you, I've gotten sufficiently scared again today, so it is going straight away. I'll set a reminder for when we finish recording the podcast.
I mean, like, wooden cutting boards are good, but just because you wash them by hand, it is kind of... I am kind of a slob, like a really big slob, and I have this nice big wooden cutting board that I love to use. And now, I cut something on it and then I think I won't wash it yet. It is still fine. And then it is still fine, and now it is not fine anymore. But again, there is no time to wash it right away. And now it dries on there, and since it is big, right, it fits badly into the sink, so then it is really hard to wash. So I am scrubbing it in the sink, and now I am cursing myself for not washing it before it dried, So, I try to use wooden cutting boards, but it is hard.
No, I'll do it. I'll do it right away today, as soon as I get home. Okay. So we've mentioned microplastics. Sleep probably also has an influence for sure.
That is related, to fatigue, and of course that is related. Like, sleep is related to everything, and when you sleep too little, the stress load increases again. So you are also damaging the thyroid gland again with that stress load. Sure. So sleep is important.
Okay. What about exercise? What about people who have thyroid disease? Does exercise and its epigenetic effects actually help them?
Look, exercise helps, but you can't overdo it. Typically, again, it is related to stress. Extremely high doses of endurance training, those kinds of things are very harmful to the thyroid because they really increase the production of cortisol, the stress hormone. And specifically among female endurance athletes, there is a significantly higher proportion of those who suffer from hypofunction compared to the non-athletic population.
Great. And what if a listener relates to this? What sport would you recommend for her?
Well, as for sports, it is kind of hard because you always need both components in your physical activity, whether it is strength training or cardio, aka endurance training, But the point is to just dose it in a way that it just doesn't extremely increase the stress load. Actually, the biggest thing in terms of exercise that most promotes cortisol production are actually activities that lead to very significant muscle glycogen depletion, which can be either very long runs or those long tempo runs, just some running. And of course, it applies to other endurance sports as well.
Biking, for example, and so on.
Just that kind of tempo, that tempo load, when you go at a race pace for a longer time, that is another thing that really depletes your glycogen. And as soon as your glycogen is very depleted, the production of stress hormones increases significantly. So these are actually the activities that you shouldn't overdo.
Great. Andy, of course, I also have healing the microbiome here. We've mentioned the importance of the microbiome several times, so let's move on. Healthier lifestyle. That is such a cliché, so I'll at least say what I think that includes limiting pro-inflammatory foods, meaning sugars, those fast foods. And sugary drinks, we mentioned that here quite often. Exercise, incorporate exercise. Don't get stressed, and maybe occasionally take a supplement. That is it for me. Would you like to add anything?
Basically, that is what it is about. It is very epigenetically determined whether it is actually how the activity of the iodine pump is heavily influenced epigenetically, but also the inflammation itself in the case of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Simply put, inflammation has an epigenetic background. So definitely just actually all the basic principles that we discuss here for any problem which that is related to epigenetics, meaning the microbiome, nutrition, exercise, stress, sleep, environment, those pollutants, right? Of course, also endocrine disruptors. So we don't just stick to microplastics, but endocrine disruptors can disrupt the function of the thyroid gland. Bisphenol typically, but others too, So just generally limit the influence of those pollutants from the environment. So the principles are basically almost the same for all diseases that have an epigenetic background.
And my last point was that whoever wants to address the function of their thyroid gland can support its function with dietary supplements. We usually name some of our favorites at the end of the podcast. The ones we bet on, like selenium, iodine,
Iodine is, of course, something I've already talked about. Yes, it is needed. If we have a deficiency in our diet, it is a problem. But then again, high doses can actually, through the negative effect on the gut microbiome, lead to a reduction in production and a disruption of the overall hormonal balance. So iodine, yes, but again, don't overdo it.
What about that selenium?
Selenium is very important. It is part of the antioxidant enzymes that protect the tissue of the thyroid gland. And in fact, the thyroid gland is the tissue that has the highest concentration of selenium in the entire body. So if we have too little selenium, if we have very little, the thyroid gland starts to suffer. And if we have just a little too little, the thyroid gland takes it from other tissues and it becomes a problem for those other tissues.
So, should a woman aged 30 to 45 supplement with it?
And how often? Well, I wouldn't really recommend taking selenium all the time. That is probably not necessary, but supplementing it occasionally, not just women, you know.
Sure.
Selenium is a bit problematic in that it is found in a lot of plant-based foods, in a whole range of plant-based foods. But we have one problem here, and that is that Europe as a whole has had thousands of years of intensive agriculture. And the selenium in the soil is terribly depleted by this intensive agriculture. So European soils are generally very poor in selenium. So we can eat things like grains, nuts, and so on, which are a source of selenium. But unfortunately in Europe, they don't have as much selenium as we would need.
So it is a good idea to have a box of selenium at home. And when you walk past the box, you pop one once in a while.
Yeah, occasionally, or just buy a box once a year and use it up to replenish your levels. Yeah, it is not saying you don't need to take it unless you really have a problem.
But if he is an endurance athlete, he can.
Yeah, it is a strong antioxidant, so even with sports, the oxidative stress is quite high. So for athletes, selenium is a good thing to supplement occasionally.
Okay. What about Bico skullcap?
Wait, before we get to the herbs, I'd like to add something. We talked about selenium, yes, and zinc, definitely.
Oh.
Zinc is also essential for thyroid function and is often deficient in cases of hypothyroidism. So I definitely recommend supplementing with zinc as well.
Again, maybe a box once a year or so.
Well, I usually have zinc at home and I usually take it when I feel something coming on because the need for it increases significantly. Even if you don't supplement it during an infection, not only does the immune system not work as it should because it is necessary for cell division, but the immune cells can't multiply enough without zinc. So zinc, actually, as soon as you get an infection, the need for zinc increases significantly. So you actually need it here and now so you can fight the infection. But of course, its levels are depleted, so it is a good idea to take it for a while after the infection to replenish the levels and make sure the zinc isn't missing elsewhere. So I mostly take zinc when I feel like I am coming down with something, when there are some bugs going around.
T-hose bugs. Okay, and I also have omega-3 here.
Omega-3, definitely. Omega-3 is important for so many processes in the body, but specifically for the thyroid. Not only is it anti-inflammatory, but it also plays a role in making sure that the sensitivity of the cellular receptors for the thyroid hormones works well, so it improves the cell's sensitivity to those hormones.
Excellent. And can we move on now and also D3?
Also D3.
I have it.
We have to mention D3 because eats D3, although it has not been proven that taking D3 improves thyroid function. But in practically all cases of hypothyroidism, and especially autoimmune ones, there is a D3 deficiency.
That is exactly what we say for all autoimmune diseases.
With all autoimmune diseases, there is simply a significant D3 deficiency. So even though taking it doesn't directly improve the function, it is not proven, or maybe it can improve it, but it is not proven by any study, but the deficiency is there. So
supplement it.
So also that, and B is also good, B complex, ideally.
Because
as a complex, I would highlight B3 because B3 creates NAD. which is an important player in cellular metabolism, energy production. So B3 is important for the thyroid, but also the other B vitamins.
Because we recorded a podcast about B vitamins, and you actually mentioned that when someone takes B complex, the other B vitamins actually support its absorption.
Yeah, the B vitamins are best absorbed when they're together. So if a person has a specific need to supplement a specific B vitamin, it is good to take a B complex and maybe add that specific vitamin on top of it.
Okay, Blani, so can we move on to herbs?
We can do herbs.
So what about Baikal skullcap?
Baikal skullcap is, of course, the complete basis for everything related to hormonal balance. It works a lot through the pituitary gland, which controls the entire hormonal balance in the body. So in practically almost all cases where something is wrong with hormones, the skullcap has a positive effect.
Got it. Then I have curcumin here, but that is also a nutrient.
Curcumin, well, it doesn't matter, but we can mention it. I just wanted us to list the vitamins and minerals together because it is kind of a thing you just need for it to work, which is just an essential nutrient without which it won't work. And these are like extra things that can support it further. Curcumin is like a strong stimulating agent for the thyroid gland. In fact, so much so that people who suffer from hyperthyroidism should avoid it because it can even overstimulate the thyroid gland, you know.
Do you think that it comes from the energetic characteristics of foods? That curcumin is sort of like a starter warming, you know, that it is stimulating.
It could be related to that in some way, which you can't fully confirm with scientific research.
Sure.
Like it definitely plays a role. It is just an overall energizing agent, a circulatory agent, and it stimulates the thyroid gland quite effectively.
Okay. Then I have ashwagandha.
Ashwagandha is like a general hormonal regulator. It probably won't help with any severe hyperfunction, but for those mild hyperfunctions or those initial problems, it works very well.
Genistein.
Genistein also supports thyroid function, and especially for women who have already gone through menopause, it is also one of the appropriate ways to support the thyroid gland.
And I'd also like to ask about Coleus forscoli.
Coleus forscoli is an interesting herb in that it can work on almost everything in the body.
Right. We know why. We've mentioned it here so many times. Well, yes.
It supports the production of cyclic adenosine monophosphate, which is basically a substance that allows the transfer of information within cells. And when we actually have a lack of this camp, a lot of things in the body can get worse because the cells simply don't get the information, the nuclei of the cells don't get the information that they should be getting. So a lot of things can start to go wrong there if there is a lack of this substance. And so Coleus forscoli can, when a person starts taking it and really has a lack of camp, it can work like amazingly on so many things in the body. And the thyroid gland is, the lack of camp is quite typical there. So that can work too.
And I would also like to ask, because we actually mentioned sometime in the first half of the podcast that thyroid gland can also cause depression. If someone found that they have problems with their thyroid gland and are a little depressed, what could they try from the things we've just recommended?
Definitely saffron.
Saffron.
So not from the things we recommended, but well, in general, omega-3s are more important for women with depression. There is some connection with the sex hormones and probably with progesterone because women generally suffer from depression more often, and they also respond better to taking omega-3s in terms of actually correcting the depression. So I would definitely highlight omega-3s for people who suffer from depression. And we haven't mentioned rhodiola yet.
I don't have that written down here either. So rhodiola.
That is also good for the thyroid, and it is also good for depression and for hematopoiesis and for hematopoiesis, yes. So rhodiola, we've talked about it many times. I don't recommend using it long term. For a real short-term boost, a month at most, and then stop taking it, but it can help. Saffron is good. Actually, curcumin is sometimes called Indian saffron. So some of their effects are quite similar. So saffron too, the color, of course, yes. And saffron also has a kind of general stimulating effect. Yeah, so it can work for depression too. And it also actually has a confirmed positive effect on the thyroid gland.
Okay.
From herbs, borage is also good for the thyroid.
As a tea.
Tea tincture, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Otherwise, I don't have any other supplements here. So are you going to pull something else out of your pocket?
I can't think of anything right off the bat, but I think we've said the most important things.
We had a question and it is going to be in the advice section now, but we already answered the young lady. It was actually, but I wanted to put it in the advice section because it seems quite common to me. And it was a young lady who was asking that she's just kind of fat, that she's not feeling quite right, and that she is probably a bit out of sorts and what she should take, and you actually recommended fenugreek and skullcap. So fenugreek could work, for example?
Well, if I remember that young lady, she was at an age where there could already be that fenugreek is good for progesterone. And in that sort of perimenopause, which, when a woman at this age suddenly starts to gain weight and feel tired, then of course it could be the thyroid gland. That is one thing, but it could also actually be some sort of perimenopause. And there at the beginning, there is usually a drop in progesterone. Estrogen's turn actually comes second. So it is good to support the production of that progesterone. And fenugreek happens to do that quite nicely.
Well, and now it has been a week. That is, I think. Yes, it has been a week since she started taking it. And I was just with her. Actually, she is my hairdresser now. She is just to be completely upfront. And she told me that it is absolutely amazing. That she is just feeling super chill. So I say, well, that is great. She goes, well, I don't even, something really upsets me. And I am just totally fine. And I just brush it off. And I am totally composed, That her inner feeling just improved so much. I don't want to say from some self-control, but it just doesn't throw her off, She said she is just chill.
That progesterone is kind of a little calming. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for example, typically with PMS, premenstrual syndrome, it can also be very much related to progesterone. There doesn't necessarily have to be reduced production. There can be, for example, an impaired sensitivity of the receptors to that progesterone. But precisely those states of crazy tension just before the period can be related to progesterone. That the moment that fenugreek worked for her, especially in combination with skullcap, because skullcap is an incredibly effective thing in this perimenopausal period. So if it worked for her like that, then apparently the cause really is in the progesterone.
Yeah, and really fast. Yeah. Really, or it seems to me that you just have to use some supplements for a longer time so that the active ingredient can build up more and start to work fully. But she was just after a week, she was just completely totally chilled out and relaxed. So I was happy for her. We've said a lot, so can we summarize? How to support the thyroid gland. Avoid inflammation. Ideally, move a little. Include effective supplements and manage stress.
And don't eat like a pig.
Yes, don't eat like a pig. And also I just thought of something. We mentioned the thyroid in combination with depression. And what if someone wants to lose a little weight too?
Well, with weight loss, it is always a question. De facto, all the supplements we've mentioned can help with weight loss in some way.
Okay.
But we actually haven't said what not to do.
Well, okay, so let's get to that.
What not to do? No ETG. On the contrary, if a person has hyperthyroidism, then ECG is a yes, also from herbs for hyperthyroidism. Ladies' best choice, good. So ECG, no, it has a suppressive effect, definitely not higher doses of quercetin, yes. ND, limit cruciferous vegetables.
That is broccoli, kohlrabi, cauliflower, cabbage, kale.
These types of vegetables are often recommended if a person has an imbalance in their gut microbiome, because cruciferous vegetables contain the most fiber of all vegetables. Plus, they also contain other substances that support the balance of the gut microbiome. So it might seem that it is a good choice for hypothyroidism too.
Right.
But some of the substances they contain, the goitrogens, are not good for the thyroid.
They suppress it. Exactly, they suppress it. That is right, sure.
So if a person has hypothyroidism, it doesn't mean they can never have broccoli. But it is definitely not about systematically stuffing yourself with cruciferous vegetables in an effort to boost the gut microbiome. You know?
Right? There are other things for the gut microbiome, and you can find them in our mini-series about the gut microbiome. Blani, can we wrap it up today?
Yes, we can wrap it up.
We're wrapping up, friends. If you enjoy our podcast, definitely let us know. Feel free to write us a positive review on your favorite platform. That will make us very happy, and most importantly, it will help other health enthusiasts find us because we will move up a little bit more in the rankings. And thank you so much for listening because our numbers are increasing, and when I check it in the various apps, I am really excited about it. If you'd like to try some of the supplements that Blanca and I mentioned, check out the Epigenic offer on the eShop EPIGENETICS. And with the code GeniePodControlu, you get a 15% discount. The thyroid gland is problematic. It is probably very individual, right, Blani?
Like it always is. It is like all hormonal problems are like complicated and hard to fix. You have to like search, you know?
And that is why I wanted to say that, so the listeners don't have to search for too long. Maybe it is a good idea to come to your practice. Blanca doesn't bite! She is nice, smiley. She'll serve you tea, coffee, whatever you want. So don't hesitate to book an appointment on our website, EVIVA. And Blanca and I are also preparing. We try to send out a newsletter every 3 weeks where there are always 2 new topics. We either introduce herbs and nutrients and or we actually cover another topic, and that is published on our website. EPVSIVA, and we bombard you and inform you about it in the form of a newsletter. But it is not that often, so feel free to join. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook so you don't miss anything. And that is probably everything. What do you think?
Yeah, and the webinars?
Webinars.
Well, we have 3 in the fall, and all of them would be very interesting. Inflammation, heart, and anti-aging. Really interesting. I don't know in what order, but
I think inflammation, then heart, and anti-aging is last. I think I remember that correctly. So friends, sign up. I don't want to scare you, but capacity is limited so that if you ask questions, there is time for everyone. So everyone can ask, and you are not there until midnight. Actually, the webinar lasts for 3 hours from the comfort of your home, from 6 to 9 p.m. And it is usually on Wednesday or Thursday.
it is usually on Thursday.
On Thursday. So friends, signing off from the microphone is Blanca Pekov, Golubov.
Bye, have a great summer.
And I am Petra Eliov, wishing you a nice day and every day under control.